So the seventh lecture is looking at the materials and resources category. This is one of the most significantly changed categories in LEAD version 4 as compared to LEAD version 2009. I suppose it expanded and widened its scope. So it's not just looking at single attributes of a material, it's looking at issues more widely. So the idea behind this category is it looks at the conservation of materials, so I suppose specifying less amounts of materials, that when you do specify them, you're specifying more environmentally responsible ones, and then it's looking at reduction of waste to landfill. And it's looking now across, in version 4, across the entire life cycle of the project instead of looking at an individual characteristic. So for example, in version 2009, you might have been able to specify bamboo or cork as a popular flooring material, but it kind of ignored the fact that they were potentially traveling thousands of miles to locations that they were being used. So it was kind of counterintuitive in ways. So now this is kind of more multi-attribute and it's a life cycle approach. So it's not just looking at that one point in the product's life, but it's actually looking at how it was extracted, how it was produced, how it was transported, how it was consumed, and eventually how it's disposed of. It focuses basically on disclosure, so looking at use of materials that have environmental product declarations, and it also looks at how you optimize those materials for particular performance goals. So it's actually, I suppose, in a way help to shift the market in terms of materials and manufacturers information, disclosing this kinds of information now. And when they've had to do that, that means they've actually had to up their game a bit as well, where they noticed parts of their products that actually maybe not performing very well and begin to address them. These kind of issues and intents translate over into these 2 prerequisite credits and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other credits that equate to about 13 points. You'll notice again, one important factor here is that all of these are related more to the construction phase of the project, so all the C's. So it's very construction phase dependent. The first prerequisite is about having a place to store and collect recyclables. This is for the actual building occupants and users, so that you actually reduce the waste that is generated and that any waste that you do can be separated and brought to the recycling centre as opposed to going to landfill. So you need to provide a dedicated collection and storage area for the following: for paper, cardboard, glass, plastics, metals. The collection and the storage areas can be separate locations, and you need to also take measures for the safe collection, for storage and disposal for 2 of these 3. So 2 out of batteries, mercury containing lamps or electronics waste. The remaining credits for this category all relate to the construction phase, so just to note that this slide is here just to emphasize that point again. The second prerequisite is to do with waste management. So this is to do with the demolition waste that is arising from any new construction or renovation or demolition. So all of that from building work, and a lot of that would be going to landfills. So the idea is that instead of it's being diverted from a landfill, it's being either reused or recycled, and that would actually preserve that landfill space. It also kind of reduces the cost in terms of haulage of stuff, and of course the environmental impact is improved. So to reach all those goals, the requirement is to implement the construction and demolition waste management plan. The contractor needs to target at least 5 materials for diversion, and they can be structural and non-structural, and then they need to approximate the percentage waste diversion that those materials represent. They also need to describe how each material will be diverted, so whether it's separated or commingled, and where it'll be taken, how it's going to be recycled, etc. That needs to go into a report. If you're turning waste into energy, that could be considered a diversion strategy, but it needs to comply with certain regulations. And just to note that estimated diversion percentage, there's no requirement to reach any specific percentage. They just have to state in the report what the percentage would be. The first credit then is in building life cycle impact reduction. So this is trying to encourage the reuse or adaptation of existing buildings to optimize the performance of products and materials. And basically, similarly to water efficiency credit and the energy and atmosphere one, the first step is always to lessen the impact, first of all. And this credit kind of deals with that. You're basically trying to reduce the amount of raw material that's being used in new products and trying to optimize what you have. So there's 4 options altogether. The first 3, need to change that to option 3, deal with reuse of what's there already. So the first option, if you reuse a historic building, it has to be a listed building, you get 5 points for new construction and 6 points for core and shell. Or if you renovate an abandoned or blighted building, it's the same, 5 for new and 6 for core and shell, where you are maintaining at least 50% of the surface area. Or option 3, that should be, where you're reusing either on or off-site materials or salvaging them as a percentage of the total surface area. And there's a table between a range between 2 to 4, 2 to 5, because depending on what that percentage is, you get a equivalent number of points. So there's more points available for this part of the credit for these 3 options from 2 to 6, because the emphasis is on reusing what we have instead of having to use new materials, with the idea that you're removing these from the waste stream and also that you're reducing the carbon footprint of creating new materials. So that's why there's more points available for this credit. Those 3 options of that credit. But the 4th option is where you don't have the option to reuse, etc., that you would do a whole building life cycle analysis. And similarly, again, to the energy and the water, you're looking at a baseline building, so a reference building, and you need to get a 10% reduction compared with that in at least 3 of the 6 impact categories which are listed, and one of those has to be the global warming potential, so that's mandatory. The others are the depletion in the ozone layer, the acidification, eutrophication, tropospheric ozone, and depletion of non-renewable energy resources. So this is where something like the one-click LCA would be used here, where you'd have a baseline building and you'd modify the design and you'd show that you were getting the 10% reduction compared to that reference building. So this is a bit tangential because it's more about the design, but how you might actually go about the reduction is you would actually start to select alternative structure or envelope materials within that software, or obviously within your design, but that you translate into software like Tally or one-click LCA, etc. So they'd have more local materials that are more robust, or that have lower end of life impacts, so how they're dealt with when they're at their end of life, or you'd minimize the amounts of them, so you'd reduce the floor to ceiling heights, you'd increase the spacing of the studs, you'd have a more efficient design, or there any kind of other strategies which eventually result in less materials. Or it might be that you're using prefabricated materials off-site, that so there's less waste and there's less of them, etc. So there's lots of different strategies for how you actually go about getting that 10% reduction. So the second credit is about the specification of products, so and using environmental product declarations. So obviously once you've reduced the raw materials in the prerequisites and the credits, now you obviously have to specify something. So this is trying to encourage the use of products and materials that have life cycle information available, and that they have more preferable life cycle impacts, or more positive ones, and that you are being rewarded if you select products from manufacturers who have verified EPD schemes, etc. There's 2 levels to these, and actually in the following two credit categories to come. The first option, or the first point available, is usually about disclosure. So the team is getting credit for if you select products that disclose the information. And the second then is about optimization, where you're actually trying to reduce the impact, as we get an additional point for doing that. In this second credit, you get 1 point if you use 20 products from at least 5 manufacturers, and there's different levels of credit available here. Where you use product specific declaration, so actually it's the third one down, I'll start with the worst one, where it's third party certified, and it's a life cycle assessment. It's a publicly available system, and it's been reviewed but not necessarily verified, and that's the difference, I suppose. So that's why they only get 1/4 of a credit per product like that. So they're in some kind of scheme, but it mightn't necessarily be a very stringent, robust or verified one. You get a half credit per product if you use an industry-wide or generic EPD, and that's to a generic product and type, and not to a particular manufacturer or company. So that only gets a half credit, because again, it's more wide, it's not specific to the product that you're specifying. And then if you have a industry-wide but product specific type 3 EPD, all of these are kind of defined in the manual, and they use certain ISOs to verify these issues, then you'd get 1 full credit per product like that. So you need to look at it would take 4 of the third party certified to make the same credits as the product type, for example. So then that's about declaration of information. And the second option to get an additional point is that you reduce 50% by cost. So that's cost of the total value of the installed products. If you reduce 50% of cost and you improve in at least 3 areas, and they're the same areas that were given above in the whole life building life cycle analysis, and you have to include global warming potential, then you get an additional point. But it should be noted that if the products you are choosing are harvested or manufactured or purchased within 100 miles, they're valued at 200% cost. So it's just something to note. The third credit is looking at the raw materials. I'm sorry, it was worth saying in the previous one, this one, and the fourth credit all come under building product disclosure and optimization. So they all follow the same kind of, they all kind of come under that BPDO, big handing, and they both all follow this kind of 2 options, where one is about disclosure and the second is about optimization. So this one is looking at the raw materials that go into the products. And you get points if you select products that have been verified to have been extracted or sourced in a responsible way. And a similar setup, you need to use 20 products from at least 5 manufacturers that have raw material suppliers that have the locations are given. They've given a commitment to long-term ecological responsible land use. They have a commitment to reduce harm from extraction or the processes, and to meet applicable standards that look at responsible sourcing. You need to have a report per product, so it's either a self-declared report by the manufacturer, so that's only worth half credit, obviously, because it's not as robust, or you have a third-party verified corporate sustainability report in which you get a full credit, and the manual will give a list of CSOs that are acceptable, and including US Green Building ones that could be approved separately that aren't on the list if they meet the criteria. And then the optimization part in option 2 is similar again, but this time it's 25 by cost, with the same penalty for 100 miles, that need to have 25% of the total cost of all the building materials needs to have products that meet one of these criteria. So they're either extended product responsibility, so that might be products that are purchased from a producer that participates in an extended program, or who's directly responsible for extended producer responsibility program. A bio-based material, again, there's standards that would have to meet there. Wood products, that would be your FSC certified products, materials reuse, that they're salvaged or refurbished or reused, and they're recycled content. They contain recycled content. So you have to get 25% of the cost to be products that have one of those qualities. You can only kind for structure and enclosure materials, up to 30% of the value of compliant. So beyond that, you need to look at other parts of the building to meet this. So this is the third credit under the general umbrella of the BPDO group of credits, and this one is about material ingredients. So, which is quite similar to raw materials, but if the last credit was about more life cycle issues, and so where the materials come from and end of life issues and the life cycle of those materials, this is actually more about the chemical makeup of the product and how hazardous they might be. So it's linked to things like VOCs or off-gassing of materials. And again, you need to specify products here that have the information available on that, and that's again follows a similar pattern, where the first option to get 1 point is about disclosure of information. So you're using product declarations, and if you use at least 20 products from at least 5 manufacturers that show that chemical inventory, so it's basically an ingredients list of their product to at least 0.1%, which is 1,000 parts per million. So it goes down to that level of detail, is what that means. And then there's particular methodologies. So you either use an inventory from the manufacturer or a product declaration of some kind, or a cradle-to-cradle certification at different levels there. And so that you get 1 point for doing that. And if you want to get 2 points, you either then again following similar pattern to before, by cost, if you use 20% to 5% of materials that meet one of these again particular methodologies, so it's either the green screen benchmark or again the cradle to cradle or an international SCP reach optimization, and again there's lots of different criteria and values there that the products basically have to slot into. There's much more detail in the manual if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty. So you either do that, or again 25% by cost of another third-party verification system. So this all, I suppose, depends on the manufacturer, or using manufacturers' declarations and using the information that they provide and gathering that up as evidence. So part of this is obviously evidencing it and showing that you are using certain amount of products that's required to gain the points, for example. So you need to gather a lot of evidence and documents, and you can either use a BPDO calculator to do that, or you collect the documentation, you collect the environmental product declarations or asserts for each of the product that meet the specific requirements under each of the particular credit categories under BPDO. Fifth and final credit in this category builds on the prerequisite construction and demolition waste management, and gives you credit for doing additional stuff in this. All with the idea of diverting from landfill. So the first option for between 1 and 2 points is if you reduce or salvage or divert essentially non-hazardous construction and demolition waste. If you do at least 50% from at least 3 material streams, you get 1 point. If you do at least 75% from at least 4 material streams, you get 2 points. Another option is that you just don't generate more than 2.5 pounds of waste per square foot. So that's 12.2 kilograms per square metre of floor area. And again, the waste to energy can be considered viable if it complies with certain regulations that are again given in the manual. So other cleaner means of managing the waste have been exhausted first, and you've got no other option, you can't meet the requirements without doing that, then it can be a viable way to gain the credits. And that concludes the 7th lecture on materials.